Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about many different environmental issues and how we can protect our planet with my guest, Dr. Rob Moyer. He is Executive Director of the Ocean River Institute. He's a science advocate and former science teacher at the elementary and high school level. He was a former curator of natural history at the Peabody Essex Museum, a former assistant scientist at Sea Education Association, and a former curator of education at the New England Aquarium. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hi, Nancy.
Your organization tackles a range of topics. You are supporting plans to try to get zero carbon emissions by 2030, but you are saving wildlife. You are concerned about the pollutants like nitrogen going into our oceans. But let's begin with the name of your organization, which you founded in 2007, Ocean River. Is there really a river in the ocean?
We got it from Rachel Carson, who at the end of The Sea Around Us writes, "All at last return to the sea, to Oceanus, the ocean river, like the ever-flowing stream of time, the beginning and the end." So she's thinking systemically, systems, holistically, everything's connected. And she's drawing upon the writings of Homer, where he talks about around Achilles' shield, all around the outermost rim of the shield, he set the mighty stream of the river Oceanus. And the Greeks believed that Oceanus separated the known world from the unknown world. So you'll see that the world in the middle of the map, and then there'll be this squiggly ocean around it, a river around it, and then all the sea monsters are on the outside and stuff. So we see it as thinking systemically and not worried about distinguishing the realm of the freshwater otter from the sea otter from the salmon, that it's all an interconnected world with people in it, and so we must all work together. And when we do, we get synergies of things happening unexpected.
And there are new concepts of the Earth, Gaia, which talks about the interconnectedness of both the plant and animal life. Yes,
and we're learning in soil science, the rhizosphere is the world around the roots of plants, and we know more about the ocean than we know about the rhizosphere, but it turns out that the fungi and bacteria that connect the roots of plants, they feed the roots, they feed the plants, and the plants, especially grasses, pump out liquid carbon. So we had this myth that soil was just decomposing stuff, that the plants had roots and the roots would die and that created soil. But no, grass plants pump 50% of the liquid carbohydrates out of their root tips to feed that underground world. And the microbes, in turn, have the hyphae are so narrow they can reach into the plant and touch every cell. So when you step on a grass plant, you damage the plant, and that stimulates it to repair itself. And so it draws more carbon dioxide out of the air. And it might need stuff like nutrients, and so it puts a message into the mycorrhizal network, this wood wide web, where the bacteria can provide whatever's needed that's transported back to the plants. It turns out that the microbes are deciding what plants need, so that a plant is in the shade, the microbes will feed the plant energy from the sunny plant, and then vice versa. So it's all networking. It's all working together, just like the planet.
Is there any kind of estimate about how many microbes are in the soil here on this planet?
Yes. You can fit 1 million microbes in a teaspoon of dirt. Well, like our stomachs have 8 billion microbes in your guts. And if we got a little more than 8 billion or a little less, we have a stomach ache.
You have worked on many pieces of legislation. Are there new bills, both locally, statewide, federally, that need our support?
Yes. There's this Ocean Omnibus bill that brought together lots of different bills. And this is what I do at the Ocean River Institute, is that I'm not going to the decision makers and saying, fix this problem. I'm waiting for them to start fixing it and have it in committee. And then I bring it out to people, like when they finally came up with this bill for helping the lobstermen pay for the new lines. Then I said, sign this letter, tell your why this is good. rather than just in general saying, I'm worried about do something about it. I talk to the politicians about, well, what are the ways to solve the problem? And then I have people ask them to solve it along those ways. But there's always new stuff coming along.
There are so many pieces of legislation at the local, state, national level, and we also have to work internationally. Is there a way that we can bring attention to the public about some of these other issues, whether or not it's to clean up polluted areas, whether or not it's to save a particular animal or to set aside a reserve, a sanctuary, a park?
Yes. I invite you to the Ocean River Institute's website, www.oceanriver.org. There you'll see on the homepage 6 different campaigns that you can choose from to learn more about and to take action on. And I also invite you to sign up for our e-alerts up in the upper right corner, and then we put out a newsletter of what are the opportunities to do something. The whole key is to be in communication with each other.
Naturally, campaigns will change as the issues are resolved or new problems come up that we have to deal with. Right now, your 6 campaigns are what?
So right now, we have a natural lawn care for healthy soils challenge. We are doing the 11th hour calling for climate justice. We are working on a federal bill called Let's Break Free from Plastic Pollution. There is a 30% conserved or restored by 2030. There's a big bill called Ocean-Based Climate Solutions out of Washington. And finally, in Massachusetts, we're working on an act for clean electricity.
Even though those campaigns sound somewhat different, as we've been talking about, they are all related.
That's right. So we are offering opportunities for people to make a difference, say, in wildlife, protecting ecosystems, in environmental education, science, and conservation.
There are literally thousands of plants and animals on this planet, and we know so little about them. You have talked about the microbiomes in the soil, and there's so little that we know about them. Are we going to be funding more scientific research so that we know more about what living beings are on this planet?
No, we just go out and look. They're for you to see, We just got to take better care of them. We don't have to be able to know their names in order to protect them and treat them right.
You're supporting this Downing climate plan, which advocates 100% clean electricity generation by 2030. Is that really possible?
Ben Downing is a former state senator running for governor of Massachusetts, and he was the first one to declare. And so I went to Ben and said, thank you for running. Let's put together a climate program that the next governor will support. And one of the elements is a bill that's already on the House, which is to have complete clean energy generation in Massachusetts by 2035. No fossil fuel use. And then to have clean heating of buildings and transportation by 2045. And now it's got to be some kind of numbers so people are motivated to act, but it can't be the numbers we really need, which is like now. But the whole point is not the numbers of when we're going to do it, but it's the mechanism in the bill. So the bill calls for a council to be composed of different members of state government representing different agencies. And in Massachusetts, we have 151 agencies, all using electricity in different ways. So this bill creates that Apollo 13 moment, remember, where the spacecraft was going to burn up on entry unless they did something about it. So they laid out all the materials they could possibly have on the spaceship in Houston and said, okay, guys, let's figure this out. And this is what's happening with this council, is that you're going to lay out before them all the technologies and ways to save energy, and then each agency can pluck from that the best way to minimize their electric use in order to meet these goals. It's more about giving government the ability to start working together and implementing rather than having the academics argue about what's doable or not. Once they get going, I think they will easily meet those goals because they'll find synergies of working together and figure out ways to do it.
I have been very concerned about our current use of fossil fuels and the dangers that fossil fuels and our current energy use of nuclear, for example, with radiation, and the pollution caused by the drilling, the impact on the land land and the resources is horrible. And I've been an advocate of wind and solar, but they're not necessarily the perfect answer either. So how do we blend the needs that we have with the technologies which aren't perfect?
And the technology is slow to come online. So, of course, you have to begin with conservation. It's not just throwing a switch to a different kind of generation. It involves slowing down our increasing demand for those things. So that's the first thing. And then there is no one answer. Google wanted to have solar panels on their buildings, or they had one that had windmills, but it turned out they don't have wind where their headquarters are, so they have to go with solar panels. So every place has to work up their own method of doing things.
Indeed, we have to look at the regional elements in terms of how we adapt to the various environments that we live in and that we depend upon. One issue in the United States is our dependence in the urban and suburban environments to have lawns instead of yards that grow food. And those lawns and other exotic plants demand fertilizers. Those fertilizers are pollutants that end up going into our water, pollute our water, and then our animal life in the lakes, rivers, and oceans are affected. Can you describe that whole interaction?
Yeah, so my son and I went sailing out of Katuitt Harbor into Nantucket Sound, and we got halfway out there, 5 miles out, and the wind died, and so I had to paddle, and we took turns paddling back. And when I put my hand in the water, when the water got up to my elbow, I couldn't see my fingers because there was so much blooming algae in there. So my goal at the Ocean River Institute is to be able to see your fingers, in the middle of Nantucket Sound, to reduce the worst pollutant of oceans is nitrogen, which is in fertilizer. And nitrogen causes the algae to bloom, and then it dies, eats up the oxygen, and creates ocean dead zones that we then have, like striped bass in Long Pond. In Falmouth, 16 of them chased in bait fish and were found dead on the shore, and one dead horseshoe crab. They blamed the fertilizer off the lawn. So they passed an ordinance saying you cannot fertilize your lawns in Falmouth. And lo and behold, their lawns are just as green as everyone else's. And it turns out that lawns aren't the problems. Prairie grasses have been doing great, and you look at any lawn, and unless it's a real chem lawn, you'll find there's a mixture of grasses and other plants there. But what happens when you put the fertilizer on is that it kills beneficial nematodes in the soil, and the roots of the plants stay right at the surface, so they don't have to go into the ground because the food's on the surface, and that makes them thirsty because they dry out quickly. And they push the plants apart, so there's bits of dirt between the plants, and we call those sun spills because the sunlight bakes the earth and causes it to compact, and the soil organisms die. So the lawn care companies blame your lawn. They say, oh, you didn't let us check under your turf early enough. We'll sell you a solution. We're going to overseed. We'll punch holes in it, and we'll spread grass seed on it. Because those sun spills are baked so difficult, only the toughest weeds can grow in there. The grass plants are wimpy because their roots are on the surface, and so easily munching for pests. Fertilizer companies say, oh yeah, you've got pests, we'll sell you a pesticide, and you got weeds, we'll send you a weedicide. Whereas if you don't fertilize an established lawn, then the roots develop relationships, are bound tightly with the fungi and bacteria, and the whole rhizosphere system works. But they want us not to see that. They don't realize that the largest organism in the world could be that mycorrhizal network that's under a lawn, because it's connecting plants all around the outside of the lawn are communicating to each other through the mycorrhizal network. So when you let a lawn be natural, it can pump out an inch of soil in a year. And when it's putting out a ton of liquid carbohydrates, it has to take out 4 tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And then grass plants use the least amount for fiber, but they'll put about 50% into fiber. So in order to get a ton of liquid exudate, it's pulling out 8 tons, because it's growing too, from the air. I'm fortunate I live in Somerville, so we have lots of lawns, and no one bothers to do chem lawn. That's out in the suburbs, And so we have lots of clover and lots of rabbits and robins, just healthy ecosystems. The turkeys, the pollution causing those harmful algal blooms, the nitrogen is coming from septic, sewage, agriculture, and lawn fertilizer. And the lawn fertilizer is the only one where people are paying to pollute. And so we want people people to treat their lawns the way the golf courses do, which they only use quick-release fertilizer for filling divot holes, and then we use 100% slow release, which has got little coated balls that will dissolve slowly over time, over months. So instead of 5 applications of 1 pound per 1,000 square feet, you can do a half pound per year per 1,000 square feet.
Actually, I think that the average American is paying all the time to pollute, whether or not we're told that we need the fertilizer for our yards, whether or not we buy cleaning products that have toxic pollutants in them, even beauty products that we put on our skin and our face that have very dangerous chemicals, whether or not we're told that we need to buy bottled water, which makes no sense whatsoever when water out of the faucets usually are cleaner and tested more often and cheaper and doesn't waste plastic and transportation energy.
Yes, but that's what's so exciting about our natural lawns with healthy soils for climate restoration challenge, is that we're challenging towns to have the highest percentage of people in the town pledging not to put chemicals on their lawn. And in Massachusetts, we have over 2,000 square miles of lawn. So if we could turn all those lawns away from being basically deserts and polluting deserts to being carbon-sucking, life-filled places. So one can do a lot in their own backyard. They don't have to use a pesticide, a herbicide to kill weeds. You can take a gallon of vinegar and a cup of salt and a tablespoon of dish soap and mix that in a squirt bottle and go after your dandelions with that, and it won't be as harmful as the glyphosate in Roundup and stuff. Yeah, we have to help people become savvy, smart consumers.
And you are certainly doing that, and we'll talk more about some of those issues with my guest, Dr. Rob Moyer, when we return in a moment.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Dr. Rob Moyer. He is Executive Director of the Ocean River Institute and is a science advocate and educator. In 2003, you co-founded Ocean Champions. What has that group accomplished? And you are also active in the passage of the Massachusetts Ocean Planning Act and the Massachusetts 2050 Decarbonization Roadmap. What are those?
Ocean Champions was created when Leon Panetta headed up a World Oceans Blue Ribbon panel to figure out what's wrong with the ocean. He came up with a report of all the different problems. And at the time, we had groups like the League of Conservation Voters that was watching and scoring politicians on conservation, environmental votes and stuff. But there was no way of telling if they was doing stuff for the ocean. And some of the best politicians on environment were the worst on oceans. So we created Ocean Champions to champion those who were good about the ocean. So it's a political organization, and we could go into elections and endorse the good guy and campaign against the bad guy. For an example, Sarasota, Florida needed a new representative, and it's a very Republican area, and Connie Mack wanted to be their representative, and Connie Mack told us that he, and I believe him, that he would be good on ocean conservation. So we bought advertising for Connie and got him elected in the primary, and then he won the general. And then when President Bush said, oh, let's drill off the coast of Florida. Well, the freshman from Sarasota, Connie Mack, was the first one Republican to stand up and tell the president, you're not doing this. And eventually all the coastal representatives of Florida said, and so the government said, well, we'll give you the Everglades. And they said, no, we want more. And finally, as Greenpeace says, they caved by giving away 100 square miles off Pensacola by standing together. And we were right there at the beginning helping to get those people together. And then Kathy Castor from Tampa joined up with Connie Mack and put forward a harmful algal bloom bill, and it took us 6 years, but that bill became law. We've gotten a reputation for, if you want help in your re-election, then you better be good on oceans.
We have to work in the political arena as well as individually and in the scientific community. You're an educator. Earth Day in 1970, that's when I got very involved in the environmental causes, conservation work, and people have awakened to the climate change crisis, have listened to people like Rachel Carson and Paul Ehrlich and Garrett Hardin. But there are some areas where people seem to still be resistant to taking action and where people still don't understand the ecological crisis. What do you think is the biggest problem?
Oh, there isn't the biggest problem. Everything is interrelated. It's like when you have 5 children, people ask you, what's your biggest problem child or something? We have to be doing everything. We can't just be worried about ship strikes of whales and then polluting the water they're swimming in. You know, like they say that climate change is the biggest problem, but the harmful algal blooms are happening not because the water's warming up, but because there's enough food to feed them happening. And so we could just cut the food off with nitrogen, then you wouldn't have that problem. Conversely, in order to get people to act on climate change, they start saying that everything else is caused by climate change, which just gets confusing. I find it deliciously complicated, and it's wonderful finding these links. The metaphor of when a butterfly flaps in Brazil, it starts a hurricane in Texas.
We don't often see the problems where we live, and yet we read about them, we see them in documentaries. Coral reefs are dying. The Amazon rainforest is being destroyed because they're building roads in there, and that's opening up a whole nother way to pollute a very valuable ecosystem. So many areas on this planet need our attention. Is there one that we should be more concerned about than another?
No, you start locally and take care of your own place and learn proper stewardship in your own community. And then you can see the improper stewardship elsewhere, and you'll know ways that they can make a difference. And that's what's important, is being able to share your solutions.
Dr. Moyer, in 2021, you went to Glasgow in Scotland and worked on a paper, Scientists Warning to Humanity, that drew attention to 6 key stressors of our environment, and those included food, pollution, the empowerment of women, sustainable economies, and energy. How do you connect those?
Well, it's all a system, and so scientists have put together this paper and published it in Science magazine that says that decision makers must manage for all of these. You know, we must be savvy to the needs of minorities. One way we connected here in Massachusetts, and part of that Ben Downey plan I mentioned at the beginning, was that whenever money is spent on climate change for climate remediation, we should be sure that 50% of that funding is going to economically depressed or environmentally diverse communities, because they're the ones that are suffering the most from sea level rise and from increased storms and air quality issues because of the nature of where they're forced to live.
You mentioned the importance of Rachel Carson's work. She was a leader in bringing attention to pesticides and pollution of our wildlife and our ecosystems. And empowering women is so important. There have been so many women around the world who have really taken action. Are they given the credit due?
Yeah, generally. Not when Rosemary created DNA, but that was in the 50s. But I guess if they're not given it, how do we know? That's a tough question.
You also are supportive of President Biden's America the Beautiful initiative. What is that?
Yes, we call this the 30 by 30, which means 30% of the land and water will be protected and conserved by 2030. And this is not just creating more national parks or marine sanctuaries or marine protected areas or national monuments that are protected, but it includes city parks. Everybody should have a park, a natural place that they can sit down and or walk through or just look at within a 15-minute walk. There again, it's not just a let's go create national parks, it's let's improve the world for all Americans and not just those who have a Volvo that can go driving off into the country.
In addition to caring about pollution in general, you also take action. Your organization also promotes individuals to take action. And recently, you wanted to help rescue the right whales with support of the Safe Seas Act. And that stands for Stewarding Atlantic Fisheries Ecosystems by Supporting Economic Assistance and Sustainability. What would it really do?
Right. So I've been watching right whales since the 1970s. And when I first saw a right whale, there were about 360. And then the population of right whales grew to over 400. And now it's back down again to 360. So we're really worried worried about the survival of the species. I'm not so worried about it because when a population gets larger, they tend to roam and spread around a bit. And so in the last decade, we discovered that the right whales are up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. They could be other places. I've been to places where there weren't supposed to be right whales, like Browns Banks, and there they were. So we don't really know how many whales there are, but we're worried about whales dying. And the two ways that whales die is that they are struck by ships or they get entangled with lobster pot lines or crab lines. In Massachusetts, the lobstermen in Cape Cod Bay, where the right whales come every April and June, and they move on north. So those lobstermen are told not to fish, not to set your lines or traps during those periods. And the lobstermen in Maine, now they're looking to them and saying, well, you guys have to catch your lobsters, so let's develop new lines that will release when the whale gets entangled so he can just swim away. Because right now we have groups that go out in the Zodiac with knives and cut off the ropes if they ever get caught up in them. So this would be an improvement on that. The Maine lobstermen are saying, but we've never entangled a whale. We are the most conscientious fisher group. They are, because they're not trawling. They're lowering these traps into the bottom of the water and working with the scientists and coexisting with the whales. I mean, Sylvester Morse invented the lobster trap in about 1873 or something, and so the whales have been increasing their population since then. So lobstermen are really upset that they have this extra cost when they don't think they're causing any harm to the whales. So Senator Angus King and Senator Sue Collins, the Maine senators, along with the two representatives, have put together this bill which is basically saying, look, right whales are a national treasure. They're the pride of New Englanders. Occasionally they are companions to boaters, and I've walked along the beach in Provincetown and had right whales just a stone throws off the beach. Such majestic. They should be helped by the government. This is a national treasure. So the bill is simply to provide grant money so that the lobstermen can replace their gear with breakaway gear.
There are many important pieces of legislation that would help various animals and plants and ecosystems, and we certainly need to continue to communicate to our legislators about these pieces of legislation. You have served as an assistant scientist at the Sea Education Association in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. You've been a natural history curator at Peabody Essex Museum, as well as teaching science at the elementary and high school level. What is the role of museums and aquariums?
Well, it's all about education, exactly, and it's engaging people in their environment. I was a teacher, and then I became curator of natural history at the Peabody Essex Museum. And so my role there was to bring people out of the museum down to the waterfront. As a teacher, I had my fourth grade students going into tide pools and mapping out the layout of all the critters, and then we'd do food pyramids and stuff. When I went to the museum, it was getting people tied to their environment. And at the time, we had this chart that showed the waters. We call it the North Shore of Massachusetts, but there was, it said on the chart, Salem Sound, and embraced by Marblehead and Beverly and Salem and Peabody and Manchester is this body of water. And so that was the right kind of scale. So I created an organization called Salem Sound Coast Watch, where we got each town to talk to one another. One town would have like a town manager, and the other town had a mayor, and so it would be their conservation person. There was one pump-out place in Salem, the South Essex Sewage District, and Marblehead had all the boats. They figured that the boat people could go to Salem to flush out their heads, their septic and stuff, sewage. And yet no one on a weekend sail is going to go over to Salem when they're out there and stuff. So by getting the towns to work together, we were able to get EPA funding to have a boat that would go to the moorings of one town one day and moorings the next and go forth. So the whole thing is about bringing people together.
I certainly enjoy visiting museums everywhere I go because you learn so much, you see so much. I've enjoyed aquariums, but I don't want to see marine mammals anymore in aquariums. Are they taking a better approach to which animals are in their facilities?
Yes, they pretty much are moving animals from one facility to another, and they mustn't wild catch any. But they do have a responsibility to have the best conditions for the animals that are already been raised in captivity and stuff.
Zoos, too, are working on programs to reintroduce species into the wild.
Yes, and they're also safe havens because we've destroyed so much habitat. Yeah, your California condor is a benchmark example of something on the very very brink of extinction, and then they were able to raise them. They used puppets so that the chicks wouldn't know that it was a human feeding them, and now we have condors again.
And we're trying to get the abalone back here in California as well. A lot has been accomplished in terms of cleaning up some pollution, but there's so many toxic sites. We still have pollutants. We still are destroying wild areas. We still are killing predators. It seems to me pretty bad, but you seem to have a more optimistic approach that we aren't leaving the world worse off.
Right. After Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, they banned DDT. I never thought I'd see osprey, and now we have eagles, and we have turkeys walking around Harvard Square. I never imagined there'd be this much wildlife in this century. You remember the first Earth Day. Everything was on a downward trajectory. We were worried about SSTs, transports, and those were stopped. It just takes time. But there are also these long-term chemicals that are bioaccumulating in animals, and that's how we're going to lose the whales if we don't keep putting poisons in.
We certainly need activists like you, and we need outspoken people such as yourself to make us aware of what is happening and what we need to do. Please keep up your good work. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you, Nancy. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you today.
I have been speaking with Dr. Rob Moyer, who is the Executive Director of the Ocean River Institute. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.